First of all, I can't tell you what an honour it is to be up here with these two absolute powerhouses on International Women's Day.
Oh, thank you, Rachel.
You are both complete trailblazers. So a note from me, and I'm sure everyone in the audience, to you for all that you do and for so beautifully encapsulating it in this film, a very positive and optimistic film, as I think you'll all agree. And I think in the face of the climate crisis, which, as hopefully most of you know, affects women and girls all the more, this is the sort of narrative that we need right now. We need this kind of hope, of determination, and of course, change. So I'm going to ask a couple of questions, and then I'll throw it out to you guys. Please get your thinking caps on. We want lots. They've done many of these already, so there's a bit of a challenge to have some new questions that they haven't had before. Becky, let me start with you. This film has been about 5 years in the making.
Mm-hmm.
Can you maybe start by telling us how it began, but also how it feels to have it out in the world?
Yes, definitely. So how this film began, in 2017, I was working for a company called Duck Productions, which is run by the wonderful Lindsay Lowe, who's in the audience tonight. Yeah. And Duck Productions does short form content for fashion brands. So I was doing a lot of, campaign work for big designers like Manolo Blahnik, and doing a lot of filming around London Fashion Week. And one of my assignments was to cover the Vogue Designer Fashion Fund. And that is an award given to the top emerging designer in the UK. As we all know now, the winner was Amy that year. Yes. And so actually it's the way that we opened the film is Amy winning the award. I didn't know that I had already started to film a documentary at the time, but I had. And we did some filming at Amy's house, and I asked her afterwards what was next in her career. And she told me that she was about to engage on a mission to create a sustainable collection from field to finished garment. And she wanted to meet the sheep that were in her wool, and she wanted to meet the cotton pickers that picked her cotton. And that was a light bulb moment for me, because I had been on my own sustainability journey for several years at that point, and had made a lot of changes in my personal life, but was really wanting to try and do something that could potentially have a bigger impact. And how could I use my skills as a filmmaker to do that? And so, when I met Amy and I found out she was about to go on this journey, I just recognized it as that, potential opportunity to have a bigger impact. And so I knew that we had to follow her story, ran back to Duck Productions and nervously pitched the project to Lindsay over some Prosecco. And she bravely took on the challenge and became a producer on the project and funded the project for the first year and a half, and still to this day. And yeah, that's how we started. And I gave Amy a call and said, can we follow you around, please? And she agreed. And then 5 years later, and then to answer the second part of your question, how does it feel now? It's actually 6 years later now, because we started filming in 2017. Yeah, it's just incredible. I mean, the launch of the film in cinemas across the country, playing at these amazing festivals. We're also going to be on Sky and Now TV from April 9th. Yeah, I mean, I think it's exceeded all of our expectations in terms of where the film has gone. And it's really, really gratifying after going through such a long and difficult journey for all of us, to be meeting all of you, to be hearing responses from audiences. Yeah, it's really amazing, and we're super grateful.
One of my favourite moments in the film, obviously aside from all of the wonderful parts on sustainability, is the part, Amy, when you go home and get off the train and make a comment about hoping that none of your friends see you, or they don't see anyone you know. What was it actually like to be followed by Becky for?
Yeah, I mean, I very naively just said, yeah, sure, follow me, no problem. Which, like Becky said, it had all its highs and lows, because at the end of the day, we were trying to still continue to work, and Becky was flying. I mean, it's a true fly
really
on the wall.
Distracting.
Yeah. And obviously, I'm not an actress either, so every time, I don't know, Becky was like, that was a great line. You'd be like, can you say it again? I'd be like, yeah, sure. And then you sort of ask 5 times.
Don't spoil the magic.
Sorry. But yeah, I mean, it was hard and it was wonderful all at the same time. And actually, it's kind of done the the best things for my confidence as well in the end. That's another part, I guess, you don't see in the film, but, you know, I sort of 6 years on ended up, you know, what if you've got 250 hours of footage of me? You know, it was kind of like media training, like on the ground. So it's kind of, it's been a good thing for my career, and it's definitely given me a lot more confidence. And I mean, the film being out and the response we've had has given us confidence, I guess, as well. But yeah, it was a new experience.
Yeah, I bet. I mean, you've obviously been on such a huge journey in that time when it comes to obviously transforming the brand, and I think your work ethic and your focus on that idea of a sustainable future is both, you know, incredibly admirable and very aspirational, and that comes from somebody that works in the industry as well. What has happened since the end of filming? Obviously at the end of the film there you see a little bit about what's been going on, and how you're sort of focused on Mother of Pearl. But how is that uptake of sustainability continuing to go? What else do you have in the pipeline?
In our brand, or just in general?
Yeah, in your brand specifically at the moment, yeah.
I mean, actually, you see at the end of the film, my daughter, who was 9 months, my son is now 9 months, and she's now 3 years old. So we are a few years on. COVID's hit, Brexit's hit, you know, it's not been an easy time. But everything we learned on that journey, which was to create the No Frills line, we actually decided to just implement all those learnings across the brand. And over the last 3 years, we've actually ensured that the entire brand hits the same criteria, which we didn't think we'd be able to do that quickly. So it was amazing, kind of once you do get to the bottom of it and kind of retrain your brain, retrain kind of all your practices in your business, and then kind of have a completely different ethos and outlook, you actually just by nature end up turning the rest of the brand into what you believe in, because otherwise it feels like those garments are kind of like the black sheep and you don't feel the same kind of connection, or they don't fit with your morals anymore. Because the more you learn, the more you get to the bottom of these supply chains, the more you meet these people or the sheep or the cotton pickers, or, you know, you realize how important it is to do the right thing. So you just can't do it any other way. So yeah, the whole brand now is focused on sustainability, and we're just learning and improving with technology, innovation, you know, with new supply chains. You know, we talk about organic cotton a lot, but now we're moving into what about biodynamic organic farming, and kind of, you know, what's the best practices we can do and how can we continue to do better. And it's just an ever-evolving journey in a very new space, really.
What would your message, both of you, what would your message be to the audience tonight in terms of their own personal engagement with fashion, the way that they shop, the way that they value clothes? I mean, both of you have already said about your own personal journeys and how that's changed, but what would you reflect on everyone tonight?
Yeah, I can go first. I mean, hopefully you guys see this as a very pro-fashion film. Obviously, all of us love fashion on this panel, and it's just about kind of reimagining our relationship with fashion. And there are so many pathways to enjoying fashion that don't even necessarily involve buying new clothes every single time. And if you do buy new clothes, you should buy from Mother of Pearl and brands like Mother of Pearl, obviously. But I think the overall message is buy less, buy better, buy high quality if you can, and explore all of these other wonderful ways that we can access fashion, whether it's buying pre-loved, whether it's renting, whether it's swapping with friends, whether it's fixing or upcycling what you already have, or supporting an alterationist or a designer who can do those things for you. There are so many different options and like really exciting businesses right now in the kind of circular space to enjoy.
I mean, everything she just said, but if you want a tip on finding new brands, there's an app called, well, it's a website and it has an app, it's called Good On You, and they actually go and rate brands. So if you're kind of wanting to buy better from more sustainable brands, it's a really good, easy starting place. And they only work on published data, but, you know, it's kind of a good start as any. But they rate you from sort of like not good at all. So your Zara's of the world kind of have a very sad face next to them. And then obviously brands that are doing better like ours, you know, have a good smiley face. But it's just a good way to kind of start, because it's hard to do, you know, you just, otherwise what do you do? Go on Google and search, you know, sustainable dress. So I think it's a really good platform to go to. And then I think, as Becky said, you know, pre-loved is just, it's such a evolving industry, and you've got a great stat on that. What is it?
Oh yeah, I mean that's kind of one of the more positive developments in the fashion industry, is that people are really embracing pre-loved. And I heard a stat recently that sector is accelerating at a pace that is set to outpace fast fashion by 2030. So let's hope that continues, because that's a huge piece of this. That sector of the market needs to grow hugely right in order to really tackle this problem.
But there's just great, I mean, I think kind of, you know, even 5 years ago when we set out on this, you know, vintage shopping, you know, you thought charity shops, there was a few, Vestiaire was going at the time, but now there's just so many more platforms. And actually I think a lot of people are really, young people are really embracing the kind of Depops and Vintage of the world and stuff, and they're finding it as a way to actually also sell their things and make money as well. So I think kind of getting into that circular mindset is a really easy, accessible way to kind of do better. And I do that with my children's clothes. You know, I only buy pre-loved. I mean, I have my own brand, so I kind of don't have to do it for my own clothes, but for my children I do it, and it's just so satisfying that I can actually just, you know, even if I see like a Zara dress, for instance, but I love it, I just buy it because it's secondhand, so I don't have the guilt connected to it. I know it's been somewhere before, and I think it's just a really kind of accessible way to do it.
Good question.
Very good question. Maybe I can talk about it from the brand and you can talk about it in general. But I mean, we actually have just changed all of our communication really around our brand. And we've actually, our brand used to be contemporary sustainable fashion, and we've changed it to contemporary responsible design. So we're talking more about responsibility. I think it's just been overused. And I think, you know, I do think there's an element of people understanding that word in a way now, so it's important to use it in some ways. But I mean, what even is, it's not even a tangible thing, you know, like any product you make, even if we make it, we're doing the best practices. Is it still sustainable? You know, you're still having an impact when you create something. So I do think it's a very overused word, and it's kind of at the root now of greenwashing, which a lot of brands are doing. So I think it's a very dangerous word, but it is also a word that people understand. So it's, you know, when we talk about responsibility, is that confusing for people as well? So I think it's a really complicated moment for sustainability because of the lack of legislation and the fact that people are using it so flippantly. I think they did a poll recently, and I don't know how many people they asked, but most people thought, was it Zara, H&M and another brand were the most sustainable brands, because they've obviously been using that word so flippantly and across all their marketing channels, because there's no legislation around that right now, that I think people have actually got confused what that word even means. So I don't think that gives you a direct answer to your question, but I guess it opens up to how complicated it is right now.
Yeah. I mean, everything that Amy just said. I like what you say, Amy, about sustainability being a mindset and a journey. It's not an end goal. So you never get to a point where you're like, right, we're a sustainable brand, or like this product is the most sustainable it can be. It's about always evolving and doing better, and kind of running yourself through a filtration process with every like business decision and personal life choice you make.
Yeah, I guess that's how I approach sustainability anyway with the business. It's just every decision that comes into my remit as a CEO and creative director is how is the best, like what is the best way to be doing that, and whether that's what energy we're using to, you know, fuel our offices, whether that's the kind of culture of the office, what we're doing with packaging, what we're doing with shipping. And actually a lot of it just comes down to quite basic things, which is, you know, kind of not wasting things, you know. And so it's kind of just a mindset. So every decision I make, I sort of push it through my filter. And that can go right to, what are we designing? Why are we designing it? Is there a customer for this? You know, we're a female heavy office. So, you know, we all say, look at the dress and maybe say, would you wear it? Would you wear it? Would you wear it? If, you know, it's not like a favorite for most people, we maybe say it's not worth doing it. You know, then we look at our supply chains and we think, if it's too complicated and actually not going to tick as many boxes as we need, should we even be making it? So I guess sustainability in my life is just, how can I do the best possible thing right now? And that also goes with our profits and our numbers and our business. And, you know, I think that's another biggest issue out there is, you know, what these brands are doing with their profit at the end of it.
I think that's one of my favourite things about the film, is understanding the way that you're approaching this notion of not just as a sort of a well-used phrase, but not just doing less bad but more good.
Yeah,
I think it comes out really nicely, hence why I use words like optimistic and positive at the beginning, because it really feels like that.
I mean, those kids need telling off. Their parents need to do something.
They need to see this film.
Yeah.
In terms of your first question, are women leading the way in terms of sustainable fashion? Are men falling by the wayside? I mean, I think men's fashion is inherently more sustainable, actually, and the way that the male relationship with clothes, at least maybe a generation ago or so, like my dad's generation, where you kind of invest in quality suits and coats that you then keep for years and years, and, you know, nice dress shoes. And those things are generally made of like natural, you know, good materials. So I think in that respect, and men don't shop as much in general, I don't think. So in that respect, maybe men are more sustainable when it comes to fashion.
Yeah, I think the culture of women's fashion, the culture of men's fashion, I would agree on that. But I don't think that necessarily means men are leading the way. I just think it's the way to, like, business or two industries have kind of ended up becoming the way that they've become. Yeah.
Yes, accidentally sustainable for sure. They're not driven by sustainability
and actually,
necessarily.
I think something that's been really interesting in the process once the film has been made, albeit a very female-heavy team. There's been how many babies in the making of it? 5 babies in the making of this. All from my experience in terms of press, it was the female journalists and editors that were much more inspired by this and kind of wrote about it in a much more in-depth, personal, emotional way, and have championed it in a different way. Obviously, there is more female journalists in women's fashion than there are men, but the males that are more known, I found were harder to kind of communicate with. And I don't know if I'm supposed to say this or not, but I know with the reviews, someone else commented, it wasn't you guys at all, but someone commented that the better reviews, the bigger stars, all came from female critics, and actually the lower stars and the more criticism have come from the male critics. I'm not saying that is, you know, finite, but we have had a conversation about it. So I don't know if there's more, I don't know, maybe it's to do with the empathy or something towards the film, but there's been more, I'd say, more love from female kind of journalists and critics to the story than we've seen with the male journalists and editors.
Yeah, that is really interesting. I hadn't clocked that. I mean, I have heard stats around the environmental movement in general being much more female-led, which is interesting. But yeah.
And then your second question, honestly, I actually didn't even know. I mean, I know a lot about influencers, but that type of influencer that's glorifying trash, I mean, I haven't actually come across it yet, but I mean, I don't know the answer because that is shocking.
Yeah, no, that's horrifying. I mean, we are, alongside the release of the film, running an impact campaign, and part of that is getting this film into schools, including fashion schools across the country. And I mean, I just did a student screening yesterday for high school students. I've done a bunch of student screenings already, and in general, they've been really, really receptive to the film. We've also had like a lot of interns work on the film over the 5 years who have really taken the message of the film on board and gone back to their friends with the message, and like a few of them have gone on to work in sustainability or to focus on sustainability in university, which is so encouraging.
And actually, I've just set a live project for Graduate Fashion Week as well. So 2nd and 3rd year fashion students that are signed up to Graduate Fashion Week basically can opt into my project if they want, which is watch the film, use, you know, sustainability, whatever that word might be, but, you know, use that within your, you know, within the brief basically. And I've set them quite a clear, specific kind of way they have to do that. So it'll be interesting to see how many students actually sign up for that project, and I'll be judging it, and it will be kind of on the catwalk at Graduate Fashion Week as well.
Nice.
So just first to comment on the sheep, and I know you know a couple of merino farms, but basically the biggest problem is merino sheep, which give the softer wool. There are some breeds in the UK that are softer than others, but the merinos, which is what you need for really like kind of, you know, apart from cashmere and things, which is obviously a different animal, but merino is kind of what you want to wear if you don't have to want to wear something underneath it because it's going to scratch you. They're actually not very hardy sheep, and they need the heat. So it's quite complicated. So there are a few farms in Devon that do it. We work with some in Portugal. But I think there's a massive missed opportunity, at least for European merino, because most of it's done in Australia and New Zealand, where it's actually too hot for them.
Goldilocks sheep.
Yeah. And I think that's the biggest misconception about fashion in a way. If let's say you've had something knitted that says made in Scotland, because there are still some knitters up there, people just assume, well, the sheep would come from there. And that's, I guess, what this film is trying to show, that, just maiden is one part of the journey. There's so many parts before that. No one really questions where the fibre comes from. And I guess that's what this is all about, isn't it? Because you would just assume that there's sheep all over Britain. We must be able to use their yarn and knit it. And I know there's people talk a lot about bringing UK manufacture back, which I agree with in many ways, but at the same time we all have to question, you can't just bring UK manufacture back and then think that the cotton and the wool is going to come from here, because we just can't grow it in this country. You can just about grow hemp, and that's the only thing that kind of works with this weather. So it all comes back to agriculture, and people forget that fashion is agriculture when we're talking about natural fibres. You're talking about forestry, you're talking about growing cotton crops, crop rotation, organic farming, biodiversity. You're talking about growing sheep, not growing sheep, you don't grow sheep, but raising sheep. Yeah, that's what I was trying to say. It's actually this glamorized idea of fashion, which is fine. I just think it's missing all that links, between what it truly is and what we truly have. Yeah.
That said, I did have a lady who came up to me last night and has a tiny brand. It's a wool brand, and she was showing me blankets. So I don't know if they make garments that you wear against your skin, but it sounds like there's a bit of a resurgence in the British wool industry that's happening right now on a small scale, but very, very exciting. And this woman's brand, her entire supply chain is, and I think it's actually in Lancashire.
Really?
Yes. But it's like blankets and I think, scarves and things.
There is some UK alpaca as well.
Yeah,
alpacas live here better. Yeah. Yeah. But it's just tiny, so it would be great to, and expensive, yeah. And that's the other thing when it comes to it's living wages in countries. That's why people go to third world countries. Not that we do that, because obviously the living wage. Well, there isn't a living wage, and it's exploitation. But we manufacture in Portugal because we know it's still governed by EU law. Well, we're not governed by EU law anymore, but it's governed by EU law, and we obviously visit them, and they know we know that they are treated very well and they're very happy, actually more happy there than they are in the manufacturing units here. But the living wage is cheaper, so you can produce something at a better price, and the infrastructure is already much better over there than it is here, so it is quite complicated.
Well, we are swiftly running out of time, but I'm going to squeeze in one final, very, very quick one from me, which is say that given it's International Women's Day, which women, and you're not allowed to say each other, have inspired you the most on this journey?
We should give a shout out to Chloe.
I was going to say Chloe. We've
got to give a shout out to Chloe Marks.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, on and off camera, she was just incredible, and she really spurred both of us on in her own way. And I can't imagine this journey without her. Can you?
I mean, we were like Batman and Robin.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's my favorite part of the film, is just the dynamic between the two of you. And I have hours and hours and hours and hours of the two of them supporting each other, hashing things out, problem solving. Whenever I was around them, they were just like talking. Like, how are we going to do this? How are we looking at things from every possible angle? And if you didn't have each other,
I mean, I could have had a product developer at the time that it was just sort of wasn't dynamic like her, and then it would have been really hard for me. And would I have got to that point? Maybe not, if I didn't have someone that was kind of willing to go on that journey with me of just like constantly hitting a problem, and then you could just walk away from it. They could say, I'm just going home now. Like, what are you going on about? That I guess, without her, we probably wouldn't be where we are. And also maybe shout out to Catherine Hamlet just for the multiple swearing that she does. But
yes. And also for being such a pioneer.
Yeah, and just taking no shit. I loved that about her so much,
Yeah, I mean, she tried to do this in like the early 90s when really no one was listening or cooperating, and had to shut down her brand for years and years because it just wasn't possible. So yeah, for sure, Catherine too.
And also, actually, just not to name names like specifically, but you know, we're a female like heavy team. You know, we've got Becky, we've got Lindsay. There's so many people behind this film, and I didn't understand about filmmaking when I started this journey. I understood about fashion, and massive hats off to everyone involved in the making of this film, because what you see on camera there with me, which is true, like that is who I am and that's how hard working I am. But Becky is just the same person, because she made this film happen in independent filmmaking. There's no money. There's no like, it's very hard, you know, and people like Lindsay behind it too. You know, this is a lot of, you know, very, very dedicated people, you know, not just what you see on camera.
Thank you, Amy.
Well, hats off to all of you. Happy International Women's Day, and congratulations on the film release.
Thank you so much. Thank you, guys.